So how many of you feel immune
Compromised.
to something? There we go, already. Why do you think that?
I'd be dead if I wasn't immune.
There you go. Okay, so there's so many like things out there. Like these cars here that force me to turn the wrong way on Lytle 5 Points Road.
Or you missed the entrance.
I didn't miss the, yeah, that's a good point. So you go around. But anyway, immunity is amazing because there's over 4,000 viruses that we're familiar with. And in this current virus that we're dealing with, SARS-CoV-2 has had over 5,000 mutations of that famous little spike protein since somebody drew the first picture of the first Wuhan spike. And what's fun is people's immune systems are being told they can become immune to the new ones if they get a shot against the first one. And that's kind of fun. That's like magic. You get magic immunity. And autoimmunity is when our body does a turnaround and says, you're the enemy, and it wants to eat itself. And that everybody has the potential for autoimmunity, but about 19% of people have something that's sort of more autoimmune than most folks. And during the pandemic, we had more chance to get autoimmune than ever before because both the virus and the shots suppress autoimmune suppressor genes. So we're born with the ability to suppress autoimmune tendencies so we don't eat ourselves and attack ourselves. But the SARS-CoV-2 and the shots the mRNA shots, all suppress our ability to keep ourselves from eating ourselves. So the challenge is to figure out how do you defeat the enemy and not eat yourself. We have, let's see, a handout that's not exactly, let's see, I'm not wired. I have to watch out, there is some wired to something. I like on a leash. I like that on a leash. She's really good at that. The leash So the answers are all right here. You just take one of these and hold up your head every once in a while and everything happens. Oh, this is bigger. I need the special glasses. I just renewed my driver's license, you know, to get the kind that you can actually get on airplanes and cross borders or whatever with. And I was filling out the I thing, you know, they say, okay, do something. And she says, read the line below the whatever, read the first line below that you see. And I said, I don't see anything. And she said, okay, I guess you got to put your glasses on. So I was trying to get the no glasses thing. And I failed. And then I was also filling out the part where it says what color is your eye and ear and hair and blah. So my eyes are brown and my hair is brown and my whatever. And the woman got the thing and she says, sir, you want to rethink that hair color? So sometimes we don't know who we really are. Or maybe we do, or maybe they don't. But I have this identity in my brain, and that's how our immune system is. It says, okay, we know who you are, and we know what we're going to protect you against or what we're going to manifest you as. And that's your IgGs. We'll talk about IgGs a little bit later, but your IgG4 tells your body that it's okay, it's you. Don't eat this, it's you. And don't attack that, it's safe. So there's safe things that hit us, and the immunoglobulin number 4 is the safe one. It's everything through, and whatever kind of friendly virus or whatever, it says it's okay. Now what would happen if your IgG4 got the wrong commands and said that everything was okay? Like SARS-CoV-2 or the wrong political candidate or whatever, then we're attacked. Let's see, so this thing is to look at a little bit later. It's the Frontline Critical Care Alliance Prevention and Treatment Protocols for COVID. This is the I Recover for vaccines, and this is the most complex one. There's 2 pages that we didn't include, but a whole lot of things that relate to cleaning up after the vaccine are things that clean up after the virus or after life or after the flu or something else. So it's a distinct kind of a summary thing. But first, we have to start, since it's the Weston A. Price meeting, February 20th. Already we're at the right place. And does that thing disappear? Honestly, that thing was telling me it was secrets. Secrets for me. Push that, push that. Okay, disclaimer. So I'm a family doctor, but I'm not practicing here tonight. I'm not going to cure you, although you could get the placebo effect from something I say, and have some kind of a miracle, or the nocebo effect, and collapse on the floor, and have people drag you out before I accidentally kill you with some kind of joke. So please get your health care from your own physician, your personal relationship with your own family doctor, or whoever is kind of better than believing too much of what you hear on the internet, or you can believe everything almost you can hear at the Weston A. Price meeting. But watch out believing me instead of believing your personal physician. That's the disclaimer. So a lot of things about white blood cells. How do we defend ourselves? Everybody knows white blood cells, right? So your white blood cell count, whenever you get a CBC, the white WBC is first. And that's kind of a fun number. Is that the top number is like, say, 3.5 instead of like 4.2 or something. That could mean that your iodine is low. You don't say that on the slide, but just one of those things. Whenever I see the white blood count, I think of iodine. There's not that many people with low iodine, but you get them easier that way if you haven't thought ahead of time. So here we got different kinds of white blood cells. Neutrophils, main action against bacterial and fungal infections. Monocytes, main action against bacterial infections. Eosinophils, main action against parasitic infections. Nobody in America has parasites, so we don't have to worry about that. Everybody had some ivermectin anyway and took care of those. Basophils responsible for responses to allergens. Basophils are confusing because when we do a CBC and we see some basophils, we kind of wonder if there's a horrible thing happening to this person or if it's a lab error. And lymphocytes, main action against viral infections, which could be SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1, Zika, Ebola, mumps, measles. Immune system lymphocytes. So lymphocytes, deep in the lymphocytes, we've heard all about T cells the last couple of years. All right, did anybody get a T cell test along the way? Professor Fon, I think those were somewhere in Oregon. Tcell.com for $150 or something like that. You can find how ready your T cells are for certain things that we don't test for some reason.
It's like one company right after that does that.
What's that?
There's like one company that did that.
Yeah.
And got approved to do that.
Yeah, so that could be boring or it could be fun when you're sitting on the beach counting your money, because a lot of people wanted to know what their T cell. I guess it depends on what it costs them to get the T cell count. So the T cells start in the bone marrow, and then they have to go to the thymus to sort of get matured, and then there's some back in the bone marrow stuff, but then they're called thymocytes some of the time coming out of the thymus. And your thymus only lasts until you're like about 40-ish. So after 40 to 50, then your T cells aren't doing quite as well, and partly you're on your own, but not that much, because we are like a walking miracle. I'm more and more amazed every day at the Creator's wisdom and how we were made. Just amazing stuff. Then we have things about immunity, acquired immunity. So obviously that's what you weren't born with. And the T cells do a whole bunch of that. And the B cells, which are coming from the bone marrow, so maybe that's easier to remember. B for bone marrow, T for thymus, except they start in the bone marrow and they go to, anyway, they float around. So we get the acquired immunity, and we've heard a lot about that relative to the SARS-CoV-2 and other kind of viruses. And in the old days, you sort of knew you were immune to certain things, and before you could get into the nursing school or something like that, you had to have more immunity or more shots. And now Ohio is one of the 13 or so states that still have parental freedom, so the parents get to decide what shots their kids get, and they can sign off on not getting any and still get into school in Ohio. And some of the school nurses flinch a little bit over that. But there was freedom in Ohio.
How long has is that then?
Cindy in my office disagrees with that sometimes. She has the governor's personal cell phone number and occasionally gives him input or feedback. And I tell her, do some positive every once in a while, so he keeps the love going. They don't respond to her. Natural killer cells detect and kill pathogens, and they are innate immunity as opposed to acquired. So they're sort of already there. There's some things that are already there, and there's these things floating around all the time, like amazing. So your body has about 60 trillion cells. That's sort of the body. And then we have like trillions of cells in the gut that are not ours. And the total genetic material in this stuff that is not ours. Okay, acquired and innate immunity. And there's all kind of arguments about what's better, the shots or the immunity, the natural immunity. So if you get the virus and you have that immunity, you're better than if you get shots. And that's for like pretty much all diseases. On the other hand, if you're going to Stockholm to accept a Nobel Prize for something, and you're not immune yet to one of these viruses that they perceive as very important, and you really want to go there, then you kind of look around at the things that are available to allegedly give you some level of immunity to go get your Nobel Prize, and you may actually get the shot. There's at least one person I know of who had to do something like that in Europe, and he got 2 shots, and he long hauled right away, and he had all kinds of misery. And that was the guy who invented the mRNA. Robert Malone got so he long hauled from the virus, and he got a couple shots so he could do this. He had to travel to speak, and interestingly, when he had the virus really early, like February of 2020. And he had some friends he was working with in China, different friends than Dr. Fauci's, I think. And he said, what are you all doing with this virus? And they said, famotidine, Pepsid. Pepsid is our protocol. They didn't call it Pepsid because that would have been an American thing. But famotidine was the drug they told him, and that's what he took. He said it helped him some, but he already knew vitamin D and things like that. And we'll kind of get into a bunch of things, a bunch of those kind of things. Autoimmunity, the immune system attacks itself. IgG4 are self-recognizers. It's okay. That's what IgG4 says. It's okay, come on in. We got no problem with you. You're our friend. You're fine. And that's supposed to be about 0.5 to 1.5% of your immunoglobulin G. And the 1 through 3, that's when you get your SARS-CoV-2 blood test to see if you got your immunity to prove it to somebody or whatever. You get a level of that. IgG 1 through 3 are attackers, and they attack. And the fun, let's see, does this go online if I click on that thing or not?
It should.
Okay, cool. So one of the fun things is when we think about autoimmune diseases, let's see, yell out the name of a few autoimmune diseases and we'll see if we get all 100.
Sjogren's.
Sjogren's.
Ulcerative colitis.
Ulcerative colitis. Crohn's disease.
Graves.
Graves' disease.
Eczema.
Eczema.
Psoriasis.
Psoriasis.
Lupus.
Let's see, Lyme.
MS.
Good question. So Lyme can cause autoimmune disease, and it can be treated with the same thing as autoimmune disease, like low-dose naltrexone. So it's kind of Lyme is a fogger, and we'll talk about Lyme here. It's on the slide somewhere. Go ahead. MS. Yeah. Lupus.
Allergies.
Allergies. Okay, there's different kind of allergies that are autoimmune and some aren't.
Cancer.
Cancers can be. Good point. So let's see the professionals here at the Autoimmune Association. So we look at the diseases, disease information, search by disease name, A through Z. Let's go to Z. I wonder what the Z one is going to be. Xerostomia. How about, let's see if that's an autoimmune disease.
Zika?
That's a virus. Z is no results. Okay, there's room to name autoimmune diseases with Z and Y words. Warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Obviously that means there's a cold autoimmune hemolytic anemia. And Kawasaki, you heard that with like the kids. And lichen planus, that's a skin thing. And lichens, those are skin things. Look at the skin thing, skin thing, skin thing. Lupus, Lyme disease, chronic is autoimmune. Ooh, isn't that interesting? I was wrong on that. So chronic Lyme is autoimmune. I'll never forget that for the quiz or whatever. Juvenile arthritis.
Hashimoto's is another one, isn't it?
Yes. Let's see, we didn't get up to age 2. This is interesting. IgG4 related sclerosing disease. So if your IgG4 says it's okay, maybe it said okay to the wrong thing here and somebody got sclerosed. Enoch, Shane line, purpura, we all have to know that in medical school because nobody ever gets it. Temporal arteritis, that's not so much fun, you can go blind. Sjogren's scleroderma, sarcoidosis, Raynaud's. So Raynaud's can be autoimmune or part of autoimmune. Endometriosis, eosinophilic esophagitis, there's more and more of that. People getting too many eosinophils, maybe it's their parasites, and they just don't know it. I used to know what Dressler's was, but I don't anymore. Psoriatic arthritis, polymyositis, Kogan's, Chagas disease. That's one of the more common diseases in the world, is that one. It's liver disease that everybody else gets and we don't. Pandas, so pandas, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococcal infections. That's pretty devastating when the kid gets strep throat and they wake up like psychotic, like 3 days later, and agitated, and it doesn't go away, and it gets worse from there for some of the kids. And or they may wake up psychotic 2 months later, and nobody remembers that they had the strep, and not associate with that. And they get sort of a nightmare, disaster kind of thing for a while. Let's see. Achalasia, so that's an esophagus that sort of just lays around. But that can be related to connective tissue disorder like hypermobility spectrum things, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the stretchy, bendy, twisty people. Let's see, any of these look like something you want? So one of the crazy things about like the COVID, like the virus, that people can end up with any number of different kinds of autoimmune diseases because the virus doesn't just go to one trigger, it goes to the general trigger, and the body says we're supposed to eat ourselves, and we're against it. It's not like, I shouldn't say eat ourselves.
Excuse me for a minute. When you say it goes to the general trigger,
Yeah.
you're saying that it flips on some kind of part of the body's classifier to make it classify more things as being dangerous?
Yeah. So you can get, so the COVID mRNA shots were shown to shift the percentages of IgG 1 through 4. So 4 was up, after the second shot it was up to 20% in some people in this study, 18, 19, 20% instead of 1. So suddenly all these viruses, infections, and whatever come at the person will be told it's okay, and so there's these places where you can trigger a whole bunch of stuff, and then there's other places where you might just flick one thing. So that's like your DNA. Did any of you pick the wrong parents? There you go. So we have one husband. So when you're a teenager, you know you did, because they're suppressing you maybe, or oppressing you. So this is always interesting. The autoimmune association, there used to be like 20 or something, and then they kept renaming things as autoimmune, and then I guess there was somebody who agreed on it, because there was different doctors who probably would argue over some of these, that maybe that's not autoimmune or whatever. On the other hand, it's an association. The association is about like members and fundraising and lobbying for causes, so these people can get research money to research their thing. If they're autoimmune, if it's a big autoimmune year for research. There'll be a shakeup though at the NIAID office. Did I just do that?
Just exit.
Commercials, okay. You had a certain thing and suddenly there's something I might want to buy. Might be something cool. Okay, so to get back to, let me make sure I go back to the other thing by just making this small.
Just X out of it.
Okay, just X out. I was giving a presentation at Wright State Department of Family Medicine, the family medicine residents about our free clinic, and we had a video in there, like click, and it didn't play, and they couldn't get it to play. And these websites, I go click, and you couldn't go there, because it was this really sophisticated high-rent type thing that did everything. And every once in a while, the high rent ain't so good, the low rent can be better. Okay, so you get the sense of some of the immune stuff. Triggers, what triggers autoimmune disease? Picking the wrong parents, that's what I call it. Genetics. I guess I should look at that one time and see what shows up on the screen.
Can you give an example of that,
Genetics,
of how that triggers an autoimmune?
picking the wrong parents. So we'll have about 12 of them in a little while here. Yeah, so we'll get, actually, I think there might be a slide for each one of these 4 categories,
Okay.
if I did this right. Although sometimes, there was 4 talks that I gave about autoimmune diseases. So as the virus, the variants of the vaccine were sweeping through, I was giving a talk every month at the Bellhop Cafe and some other talks here and there and here. So I hit a certain point and said, wow, everything is autoimmune. So I have to give talks about autoimmune. Started off with brain, because the psychiatric diseases pretty much could all be labeled as autoimmune. And that's always fun too, to try to figure out, well, how is that so? That you have to sort of dig through the psychiatric literature, then come back through the nutrition and toxicity stuff. And lo and behold, pretty much every psychiatric diagnosis can be generated by a genetic, an autoimmune, toxic, a heavy metal. There's not that many diagnoses actually. And there's not that many drugs, but there's all kinds of foods that may help. So we'll hit on the brain here a little bit later. So trying to get from the pandemic, issues in the pandemic, including lockdowns and whatnot, and autoimmunity. So the immune system is all happy, and it's ready for anything, and then things attack it, and it makes decisions based on these 4 factors, maybe. Who your parents are, what your mother says. If your mother gets the wrong switch from the willow tree and hurts too much, your cortisol levels go up, and your immune system doesn't work as well for a couple hours. That was the street I lived in, back in Liberty Rex on Back Street there. We had this one willow tree, and Gladys and my mom, and anybody else who had kids there, Ruth, what's her name, they all got switches from the willow tree. And they all said the same thing. They said, give me a switch from the willow tree. And you give them a switch from the willow tree, that's not big enough. I'm going to get one myself. And so they get the big one, and they clap you twice, because they felt their mothers, they feel guilty. Willow tree doesn't cause autoimmune disease, but it could predispose to that if you're whipped all the time, and you're oppressed, suppressed, and your immune system just doesn't respond that well anymore. Environmental factors, like infections and toxins. So we look at this list here, we're missing a couple, but vinyl chloride, obviously if you burn vinyl chloride, what do you get? For all you Vietnam veterans out there? Agent Orange. So dioxin is the base chemical, the basis of Agent Orange. And that's what they just emitted into the air at East Palestine, Ohio. There was a whole bunch of Agent Orange, dioxin.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so one of the experts in the state on dioxin is Sherry Tenpenny. So Sherry Tenpenny wrote a book called Fowl that was about the bird flu was here and there, but it allegedly was in Vietnam, and they said, well, we just got to kill all your healthy chickens, or how many million healthy chickens they killed to sort of keep the bird flu from spreading. And Sherry said actually it was dioxin toxicity, and that all these leftover things from our presence there, the birds they were still in the soil, and the birds were getting those, and their immune systems were dying off, and they were dying.
How many years after that was, how many years after the initial exposure to Agent Orange or vinyl chloride was that?
That was 20,
Ooh.
or let's see, I was over there in mid-70s, 71. I was a helicopter pilot, and I did my job to spread Agent Orange, because I was flying for the Corps of Engineers, and we flew from wherever we were, the helicopters were safe every night, so we had a safe place where we were sleeping, and we'd fly out to the west, to these hills, the tops of which were cut off. They were now fire bases, and had a big gun up there, but they were like dust and dirt. So we'd have to go up and look at them with the major or the lieutenant colonel or whoever was in the back seat. And you come into land, and like the earth goes.
Everywhere.
And I wasn't aware till much later that there was Agent Orange and everything up there. I know some dead people who got the Agent Orange, bladder, prostate, pancreas, nasopharyngioma. He didn't die. He went to the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, where one of our went to West Point. One of my classmates was on the board of directors, and let him stay at his house, and maybe they loved him a little extra temporarily. Heavy metals, mercury, aluminum. Speaking of vaccines, so I'll mention aluminum a little while later because it causes autoimmune brainitis. Medications, just any medication can do any kind of strange thing. Just on the COVID, just saying something special about the vaccines here. COVID-19 can cause autoimmune, but it's supposed to help the immune system. The mRNA shot is subject to question about how it works, why it works. The Novavax shot is interesting. They just take the spike proteins and grind them up and put them together with something and give you a shot. So you have a better chance maybe with that one if somebody forced you to have to get a shot to get your Nobel Peace Prize or something. But they kind of blocked that one because they wouldn't let it be a booster for Pfizer or Moderna, even though it could have been easily. So they could have just, a lot of people would, if they had to get their shots, they would have opted for Novavax for the booster, and the Pfizer or Moderna would have been in the rearview mirror, I think.
They just released a day or two ago a study that said that the Novavax has the same or more
Clots.
heart issues,
heart.
clot issues.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that, you look at who funds the study, and that's part of the fun too, is that a Pfizer-funded study. Is that basically the plan of corporations is to kill their competition through one means or another. And that's where we look at the studies like the ivermectin studies were near and dear to my heart, like who was funding those and what were they doing. And then Pierre Corey of the FLCCC would sort of do a podcast and say, well, here's the study and here's the things that we see, and they didn't do this and that. And the last big NIH study on ivermectin, they didn't release the data. It was a year later they hadn't released their data because they were sort of making it look like they were making up some things, and they left out a whole bunch of things. But that it's kind of like a war, levels of different wars. Here we go, genetics. So how many did 23andMe or Ancestry.com? Cool. And did you run it through one of the 200 sites on the internet where you can have things analyzed or translated or something? Like, I'm going to show here later, Genetic Life Hacks is Debbie Moon. It's only 39, I'm a cheapskate, $39 a year. I like that one. And there's Dr. Amy Yasko. So he did Yasko. So Yasko, I love her. She's the queen of methylation on the East Coast. And she knows everything about autism and nutrition and DNA and a bunch of other things also. Ben Lynch, he's the king of methylation on the West Coast. He's a naturopathic doctor who wrote a book called The Dirty Gene, which is really good. It talks about 7 major gene types and has quizzes so you can clarify if you may be in one of those categories of flawed genes in one of those 7. And then the food you can eat to maybe bypass your flaw, where you picked the wrong parents, but now you can forgive them because you found the food and you got rid of the wheat and you got rid of some other things. And then Lynch says, well, if that's not good enough, then here's some supplement kind of categories that you could use if the food's not good enough, and then here's some naturopathic doctors you can consult. So I like that book because it's like a people book. You kind of go from you to food to guilt or sin to repentance to throwing out your meat and your bread to dig it in the trash can just to get one more piece. HLA system is one of the big major histocompatibility complex, meaning what's compatible and what's not. So these genes code for proteins that help to identify what's foreign and what's self. So they're like making little proteins and say, okay, go find what's self and say it's okay, and go find what's the enemy and push a button so something attacks it. So B27, though, is one of the negative HLAs, and it can increase susceptibility to invasion, etc., to the wrong thing. 6 to 9% of people have this HLA B27. And this is one of the bigger ones, the HLA things, human leukocyte antigens, this whole big system. And if one of the big ones only has 6 to 9% of people in it, then there's all kinds of negative things. In fact, if you look in the genetics on the internet, the online Mendelian Inheritance and Man site, .gov, they have over 22,000 single gene mutation disorders. That's like 22,000, most of which you've never even heard of. But you can take any kind of symptom you have in your family, or your aunt you're always trying to figure out, or whatever, or your boss, and you can take those symptoms and put them in there and push play, and they'll come up with multiple different mutations that could cause those symptoms. And names about that long for a lot of them.
Just a kind of a question on this sort of thing about immunity. It seems like the body has a classifier that's classifying something that it should attack or something that it shouldn't attack.
Yep.
And if you have a classifier, you always have features by which you make that classification or that determination.
Yep. You read the book?
No, I work on classifiers.
Oh, okay.
So if you got a certain set of features, then the way classifiers typically work is that you train classifiers on like labeled data, where things are identified like as threat or non-threat, and you have instances and it generalizes from that.
Yep.
Is it an analogous thing that's happening inside the human body?
Yes.
And
Much
if
more complex than anything we can even understand, but it's beautiful. Yes.
and now the question, when does the training happen? Is it some of it's wired from birth, and then you have some things that are training takes place over time. And I'm assuming that when somebody gets a vaccine, it seems to me, as somebody who designed classifiers, it seems like just a really stupid idea. Because if I took something with 150 features, and I said I'm going to remove the 4 dangerous features out of the 150, and then I'm going to inject it into my body in such a way that my classifier thinks that it's dangerous, even though I've removed the dangerous features, then I'm going to have a correlation between danger and 146 benign features. And if I repeat, if I repeat that over and over again with that same example, then I'm forcing my classifier to, at least at a bare minimum, consider some of those things, features to be dangerous that are not, which would be autoimmune disease.
There you go. See how easy that is?
So
Probably the next slide, I hope.
I'm kind of wondering, like, how on earth anybody ever thought this was a good idea?
There's a book called Turtles All the Way Down. You read that? Turtles All the Way Down? So Turtles All the Way Down is about that thick, but it analyzes every vaccine and says what the scientific basis for that vaccine was. And the reason it says turtles all the way down is because of all the vaccines that are given to everybody, how many of those actually did the research that is supposed to be done to get approval?
Dr. Malone just did a thing over the weekend.
Okay, just quote him if you want to. I don't mind plagiarism.
But he did
You don't have a
it over
number?
the weekend.
This is a number. It's a number question. How many of all the vaccines that everybody's kids get, like right now, all the kids' vaccines?
0. Let's start with 0.
Okay, that could be totally true. Or it could be
Probably is.
Aren't there like 72
I'll
of
make
the
everything hit.
vaccine schedule now?
One.
Something like that.
One?
So one vaccine actually did the right studies. That was like decades ago.
Which one?
Tetanus? Polio?
I don't remember if it's one I ever had. Maybe it was.
The
So it was, well, smallpox or something, it was something like, yes, like back before the world existed.
So, but the whole premise behind a vaccine and training a classifier goes against anything that anybody who ever does classification work would do. If you talk to anybody who's in artificial intelligence or machine learning, and you ask them, you say, what would happen if I took your training deck and put a bunch of false positives in there? They'd say, well, it'd ruin your classifier.
There you go.
And so I'm kind of wondering,
Why did they do that? Well, that's because the government hired a bunch of declassifiers.
I'm wondering a few things. First of all, I'm kind of wondering exactly what is the feature space that
I'm
you
sorry,
use
but I have to give
classification
this,
on?
I have to get part of this talk before we get to the next
Okay.
thing. But you're totally right. And there's other points to be made here.
Okay,
And you'll see them.
okay.
And you'll know the truth, we're not, we're not talking about the vaccines first, but so the vaccine, so that's the sinful thing is they made this vaccine that could make you autoimmune. They made the virus at the same place, maybe the University of North Carolina, according to rumors. And then they partnered with some people in China to finish it off. So the patent for the vaccine for Moderna was transferred to, the rights for that were transferred to the NIH, which patented the Moderna mRNA vaccine in November of 2019. So if you recall that when we found out the virus existed, and when anybody said it was the first time they ever heard of it, it was in December of 2019. So we already had a patented vaccine just accidentally ready before that. They had 100,000 doses of it ready in 2019. And that came out of the World Economic Forum with Brewer, how do you say that guy's name, the president of Moderna. That's the HLA, so this is your good stuff, your HLAs, and you want them to not have HLA-B27, multiple subtypes, and they can cause these kind of autoimmune diseases. But I have no idea how this came up in red. I think it was my printer was running out of ink or something. Ankylosing spondylitis. That's like the spine is just like bamboo and it can't bend, plus some other things. Reactive arthritis. This one is not uncommon. You get arthritis, you get one of these infections, and your joints hurt, and then they stay hurt, and then it's basically like rheumatoid arthritis, or reactive arthritis, or something that may test temporarily positive for rheumatoid or lupus or something, and then sort of fade out. Those kind of things can be really bad. Psoriasis, inflammatory bowel disease, or you got your Crohn's and your ulcerative colitis, acute anterior uveitis, so inflammation of the eye. Whenever I see somebody says they got red eye or whatever, I think autoimmune, because everybody else is thinking pink eye, pink eye, pink eye. What fun is pink eye? That's for school nurses. They crush kids with pink eye. They're thrown out of school with pink eye. Pink eye is usually an upper respiratory infection, not pink eye. How does this happen? Molecular mimicry. Why is that in those tiny? It must be significant. It printed out automatically in some small letters. So there's some molecule in the antigen, the thing that's foreign, that looks like your body. Or there's, so your body gets antibodies to that thing, like the spike protein, but suddenly your cells are making the spike protein, and the 5th to 8th day after your second shot with the Moderna or the Pfizer or whatever, the ones that have the 2 shots, a bunch of cells break while they're making those spike proteins, and the spike proteins leak into the blood, and then there's spike shedding, just all over the body and out the mouth and the breath and everything else. Yeah.
Why would you, I would never really want to put spike proteins in my body.
There you go.
But if you wanted
But the president said a bunch of people had to.
But if you thought somehow that having spike proteins in your body was somehow beneficial, then why wouldn't you just inject them gradually until the point you didn't need them anymore, rather than teaching part of your body to create them
There you go.
themselves?
Operation Warp Speed. They didn't have the time.
Well, I
Somebody
mean,
didn't have time.
you could create them
The
yourself
committee
faster,
member,
right?
the committee member didn't vote your position. So your lobbyist failed.
Yeah.
So people failed and people died. And it's HLA-B27 protein often misfolds. So HLA-B27 misfolds, keyword there, because protein misfolding is something that might be happening in the brain from different kind of things like Alzheimer's disease, which can be caused by aluminum, picking on people that inherited the ApoE4 isoenzyme or some other kind of genetic things. And look at 23 and 17 is another inflammatory pathway that's involved in autoimmune diseases. And this HLA-B27 leads to this stuff. So these things work together to go against you, except they could go for you in some ways. Some people with hepatitis C live longer if they have this HLA-B27 abnormal thing. And people with AIDS, likewise. That's where you get some weird things like, okay, so do they want a shot of HLA-B27 protein? We don't even have that. But people start to think about this stuff. Well, if I just gave this, we found this in the rats or the mice or whatever. And then they do the people studies and a bunch of people die and then do some more studies. And that's the fun of studies. Better response against Epstein-Barr in the people who have the flawed HLA-B27. So maybe they don't have chronic Epstein-Barr, other autoimmune diseases and mutations. So there's CTLA4 is an autoimmune gene. And this one, let's see, it's fun where you can read about all these things later. This is Genetic Life Hacks. Debbie Moon is kind of a genetic author, writer, science geek who writes this probably once a month. She's got one of these things. It's a free ebook that I could get if I do something. Oh, histamine intolerance. So the fun on her thing is she has an outline that says, okay, this is what this is. Autoimmune diseases are caused by your immune system targeting and attacking cells in your body. This can result in a number of different problems: joint pain, scaly, thick skin, hypothyroidism, and more. Often difficult to get a solid diagnosis with autoimmune diseases and conditions since the symptoms overlap with other conditions. So she talks about one genetic cause of increased susceptibility to several autoimmune diseases, just like that HLA-B27. That was one genetic cause of several diseases. We won't go through thousands of these. Just you sort of get the idea that if you look at a place like Debbie Moon, you see a general category like that. That could be helpful if you're thinking about autoimmune disease for your niece or nephew coming back from 4 COVID shots or something. I tell people, get your COVID score like a tattoo on your forehead. It's like if you had the COVID twice, put a 2. If you had it no times and no shots, a 0. So get 1 point for each shot and 1 point for each COVID. If you got a 5, worry, because it's just a whole lot of stuff for the immune system to try to contend with. And the reason that God made the Ohio State Buckeyes get crushed by the Michigan Wolverines at football was so people could understand why not to get another booster shot. Because the defense of Ohio State was ready to tackle number 2 on every play. And they, like the whole defense, tried to stop that little guy who shredded their defense the year before. And at the end of the game, they said, yes, he got 0 yards. But he sort of had like a broken leg on the bench and only played 2 plays as a token because he's a senior. And the quarterback just kind of went, and that helps people to understand, if you get all those boosters, your immune system is ready to tackle something that's on the bench. That's what God told me anyway.
There was, Del Bigtree did a great explanation of the whole.
That's where I got that metaphor. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah,
I
it is
should have
great
referenced it.
what he did. You can go back into the archives and see that episode of how you're having this specific thing and then everybody else is just dead out there on the field. It's great. So,
Where was that?
the Highwire.
Highwire. So Highwire, he was interviewing Geert van den Bossche.
Yeah.
So Geert is my man. So he's the man who has the truth, and he's not a librarian. I love librarians because they know everything. And you probably do too. You're married to a librarian. They know everything. You can fit perfect because categories are important. Getting a category for everything. What's that word called?
Classifier?
Classifier. Some of the words probably begins with a C. But after, see, I actually had 2 of those shots 2.5 years ago, because I'm a doctor. Doctors get all that stuff. And anyway, 26.2 billion strands of RNA, probably not that big, were shot into my left arm. And I naturally assumed that all of them would go right to the right place and make 26.2 billion little spike proteins or multiples thereof, and it would be awesome. Actually, I didn't assume that. I went to Sherry Tenpenny's website before I got the shot. I was going to get the shots because I'm a doctor and we do all that stuff. And my 2 sons are doctors and they were going to do it. So I said, okay, I guess I'm getting the shots, but I want all kinds of things beforehand. So there's protocols from the International Congress of Integrative Medicine in Bluffton about blocking certain things. And then the ivermectin literature just came out in December of 2020, just in time to kind of get the ivermectin started, and aspirin, because the shots go to make you clot and die. There's things to try to protect yourself if you're trapped with the shots, and then you kind of keep figuring out how to get rid of the spike. So we'll talk about spike blockers, spike flushers here in a little while. So the CTLA4 can cause Graves' disease, somebody mentioned that already. Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, it actually get hyperthyroid first, then it burns out. Type 1 diabetes, lupus, vitiligo, that's like Michael Jackson had this splotchy skin. That really was a challenge for him. Oops, we got other challenges. Multiple sclerosis, which also can look like Lyme. So Lyme can look like MS. So people have like MS or congestive heart failure and they're on the transplant list. It could be Lyme disease. And we don't have any good tests for Lyme. Lyme is tough to test for though, so it's real frustrating. Celiac disease, myasthenia gravis, Sjogren's syndrome. So Sjogren's, probably about 2005, I noticed Sjogren's was roaring past rheumatoid arthritis and scleroderma as the most common autoimmune disease that we were seeing, and kind of wondered why, and it looked like it went back to the wheat, maybe primarily, but I'm not sure they ever really tracked it down. Just a lot of dry eye, dry mouth people suddenly. And then the hypermobile, there's more and more hypermobile people showing up, but the shots and the virus and estrogen can make collagen more stretchy, and so connective tissue stretches more, and there's more things that happen associated with those things. So there's genotype. So the fun of her thing is, at the bottom of this, there's a genotype report, and if you're signed in, it says your genetic data is something. Let's see on this one. Actually, I was an AA on this one. So down here at the bottom it says AA, and it's in. If it's the bad one, like this one down here, it's in yellow. So I just scroll down and see if I got a bunch of yellow or not. And she says, what do you do to get around this? The diet, the autoimmune paleo diet has been effective for many people. And there's things about that. Terry Wall's book called the Terry Wall's Protocol, or the Wall's Protocol, is a classic. I think there's a slide here later about Terry Wall's diet. So trying to figure out how do you pre-treat autoimmune in case you get these vulnerabilities. And how do you treat it if you got it? How do you get rid of it? It's like diabetes, you can get rid of type 2 diabetes. Both the diets focus on fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, high quality meats. Both diets avoid common food intolerant sugars such as gluten, dairy, and eggs. So the fresh fruits isn't quite right there for Terry Wall. So Terry Wall said get berries or fruits, get things, vegetables and fruits that are the same all the way through as one category. So that's like your berries and what else is the same? Squash, the same color all the way through. And
They're also lower carb, aren't they?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so lower carb, natural supplements that may impact CTLA4. Vitamin D is good for everything. So that's in everybody's protocol. I could log in if I wanted to, and my whole truth would be right in front of you here, but I won't do that.
So is this website called Genetic Life Hacks?
Yeah, .com. GeneticLifeHacks.com. Right there is Debbie Moon.
And so if you have an autoimmune disease, you can go into this thing
Yeah.
and...
If you have any disease that's potentially hereditary, she kind of comes through the disease, then the genes, and then the food. Some of the food's not the greatest. There's a dietitian group in Yellow Springs called Clem and Time. Clem and Time, who are incredibly into nutrigenomics with food. So they kind of understand how to try to personalize your actual risk. They even do things like order stool tests, which is way beyond what a lot of doctors do, because we figure somebody's got to analyze that test and we feel for them. Like, somebody's got to do that. So she's got to prioritize your health goals, optimize your diet. So when you join here, it's kind of fun because you get your member cheat sheet. Let's see, quickly, it's getting started. How to check your raw data. So I hit on that, got my raw data, it was 72 pages. Because every article she ever wrote, she has the gene thing there. These are not genetic things, like your 23andMe and your Ancestry.com is a genomic test. It's not genetics. So genetics is kind of more expensive and tighter and higher quality with all the lab things and so forth. But genomics may get you in the territory unless you tell the family you're about to die because of your 23andMe test. Yeah.
Is this, how does the Clem and Time and the Debbie Mann's genetic life hacks, is, oh, man.
They don't know each other.
Is that similar to the dirty gene? Are they all
The
sort of
concepts
thinking
are
alike?
similar. It's like he says, like you get categories and you're trying to figure out what's the quality of the categories
Yeah.
and who's going to kill you first. And you got to keep recategorizing stuff. And we have to keep, like as a physician, I have to look at 3 references for everything now. Because they censored so much stuff during the pandemic. I'm reading Substacks like every night. And yeah, so Jessica Rose, everybody read Jessica Rose? Despicable Jessica. And Igor Chudov, I think he's somewhere in Europe. And so these people are geekily finding all the literature they can and going through it and analyzing it and saying, okay, here's what it looks like is the truth about this thing on the mRNA or the Novavax or the 2 dead virus things that are going to come later. So they're kind of decided, just like Naomi Wolf, it's like a war, and somebody has to lose in a war, so they want the Pfizer's to lose. And that's like Enron. So could Pfizer become Enron? Sure. Sure. So anyway, so this I love the Debbie Moon thing because she keeps writing, and she has a big thing on MTHFR. A lot of people are interested in that. 26% of people don't process their leafy greens well enough to methylate their B vitamins. And so if you get enough methyl groups say no, don't do it. And adenosyl groups say yes, do it. And that's part of what happens if you get the right kind of B12 and folate. You get the right commands. Okay, back to higher genes influence. So this is another Debbie Moon thing. It's psoriasis and certain things about medications. My finger's too fast here. Rheumatoid arthritis. Looking at that, I know my grandmother on my mother's side, my whole life she was in a wheelchair and had rheumatoid arthritis and back then they had steroids was one of the treatments. If you hurt so much you get steroids and then you get like diabetes and then you get some other stuff and then you die. And she read the playbook, so she did. These days she would have gone about another 15 years probably. So genes are root cause of rheumatoid. A lot of people wonder if they have this a rheumatoid thing or is it arthritis. And things that are risk factors for environmental triggers like that may add to this is smoking, silica dust exposure, periodontitis, being overweight, vitamin D deficiency. So there's some common things that start to pop up on a lot of the environmental risk for genetics being triggered at a lower threshold. Protein antibodies, some words we've never heard of. And we go down here, and I think at the bottom of this one, she had about 9 genes here. And there was some summary down here where I had about 7 out of 16 things. So my mom didn't get it. So that means I won't get it, right? No. That's a sampling error. Chronic inflammation, autoimmune risk. So this is sort of like everybody else. So what happens with the stress of the pandemic is it kind of triggers inflammation, and it doesn't recycle, it doesn't settle down, it doesn't calm down, and it can trigger a lot of different things if we're trapped. So like the lockdowns and the masks, as you remember, the masks, and the, let's see, so how many people are doing something like this every day? Look to the right, 30 seconds. I can do that here because I got a clock there. So this is toning your vagus nerve.
Yep.
So you kind of do that. I'm sorry, I'm turning my head. That's cheating. I got to do 10 extra seconds. So you turn your head, you turn your eyeballs for 30 seconds. And when you swallow, that tells you that's a vagus nerve reset. And you put your eyeballs to the left for 30 seconds. I'm an early adopter, so I swallowed already. But I'm also a physician, so I don't believe anything. So you got to do the whole 30 seconds. Okay, so that actually loosened my sternocleidomastoid muscle, so I can turn my head further in than usual, and loosens the trapezius muscle, and more importantly, it loosens these muscles here. So, if I wasn't giving you safety signals, if you look at my face now, your unconscious mind will send a message to the autonomic nervous system that I'm safer.
Will the breathing, the 4-7-8 breathing, do the same thing?
Yeah, 4-7-8, breathing out is the key there. So if you want the vagus nerve to work better, and if the vagus nerve works better, right on the brainstem, right near where the one part of the vagus nerve comes from, is some other cranial nerves. The 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th cranial nerves are friends of the vagus nerve. So if you tone the vagus, these other ones lighten up a little bit, and they include these other muscles, so they can do a relaxation thing. Breathing out can tone the vagus nerve also. Breathing out prolonged, so like when you play your didgeridoo, since you asked the question. That's called a blowout. When your mouth ain't big enough. Must be that intermittent fasting. Blow out some fat lips.
Air, or are you using your voice with that too?
So what I do, let's see, I'll do this and remove it. That's it.
I love the vibration.
Yeah, so that's a biological frequency. So this particular frequency resonates to your spinal cords. I can entrain to your brain. The brain says, oh, we got this frequency, we got this integrated, we got this together. So this was only $20 on eBay about 30 years ago.
No one can afford it now.
Where do those originate from?
Australia.
Australia. So the myth is that the shaman was looking for some fire, for some wood for a fire, and grabbed a eucalyptus branch, and they don't kill anything in that particular, whatever their belief was, and they saw termites in there. So he blew to get the termites out, made that sound, and somebody liked it, so they kept playing the didgeridoo. They called it something else. But then it was like a guy thing, so if a woman touched it, she would become sterile. And there was all kind of women creeping into the shaman's tent just to touch the thing at nighttime. For the tribal birth control. So this is too much information. So the chronic inflammation, so inflammation can trigger immune system. So we got the cytokines. Remember the cytokine words? So the interleukin-17 is a pro-inflammatory cytokine produced by T helper cells. It is part of our immune system. necessary in times of injury or pathogenic infection, but problematic if overactive. So it's like the rest of us. Hyperactive might be a problem. Anyway, so interleukins 6 and 10 are too inflammatory, and they're considered to be negative. And they cause the cytokines. So the cytokines are positive in certain ways and negative in all kinds of other ways during the COVID, because the COVID was trained to trigger cytokine storms. And the cytokine storms were triggering like the nicotinic system. So if you smoked a lot and had a bunch of nicotine in your blood, you didn't have as big a cytokine storm because of something. So there were a bunch of smoking, really heavy, 50-something Chinese men admitted to the Wuhan hospital initially who did not die, as opposed to the sort of thinner guys. And they figured later that the nicotine was blocking one of those flow things that has to do with the viper bite. So the body was programmed via the shots or the virus to act like it had been bitten by a snake. And the smoking, the nicotine, tended to block that. So the smokers, so when the virus first started, I told a couple of my smokers, I said, well, don't quit smoking yet. We just got a good paper about nicotine with this virus. So in each one of these, she's kind enough to give a quick overview of the immune system, because from page to page, you kind of start to remember about this. It's kind of complex. So this page, she said, many parts fight. Okay, she said the same thing. Oh, Debbie, that's cheating. Multiple types of T helper cells secrete different cytokines needed for different types of immune responses. One of the T helper cells is Th17, which secretes the inflammatory cytokine interleukin 17. So we get the T helper cells. The T regulator cells are the ones that pick up the debris. So we got like a cell that's infected with viruses, and the T helper cell, the T regulator cells grab those and wipe those out. T helper cells are doing something else. So these T cells with these different labels on, but they change hats every once in a while.
Wasn't that also, Doctor, the interleukin 17, the factor in the myocardial and epithelial cells getting an autoimmune reaction in the body itself going at the heart for the myocarditis, pericarditis?
Let's see if
That
Debbie
was brought up again.
Oh, that's with the new stuff?
Yeah.
There's epithelial and mucosal regions, lung, geotric, skin, psoriasis, let's see, 17 genetic variants, 17A, respiratory inflammatory bowel disease, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, bronchitis, gastric cancer, and more. So more must be the myocardial thing that they, so here's the gene report, and I think on this one I picked the right parents. Well, I'm not in there. And that's a good point, because every day for the longest time there was some new thing about something causing something and something being, and the question was, what's the pathway? Are my patients on that pathway or they're not on that pathway? How do they get off that pathway? So if I post something on Facebook, it was shadow banned. People were not getting my Facebook stuff for a while and I didn't realize it. I have something on MeWe. There's not nearly as many people over there. But it's sort of hard, like in the civilian sense, to follow some of these words that they bring up. Like doctors are not that big on toll-like receptors and interleukin 1 through 39 and so forth. And we have to catch up some and stay aware of some of our other stuff. And then we have to try to get excited when we hear like a normal cough or a normal sneeze or something. Praise the Lord. It's like a normal cough or a normal sneeze. Okay, that's those variants. Pandemic factors. So this is the pandemic thing. Sleep, 70% of people are sleep dysregulated or disrupted. Tons of vitamin D3 deficiency, and we have the American diet, which has too much wheat and some other things. And then there's lifeitis, choiceitis, peopleitis, suburbanitis, all the itises that can inflame people also and kick up the immune system. We lost our fitness and exercise time. I just keep this for demonstration purposes only. But my son and I, though, we were kind of shut down. Every Sunday my wife left us, went over to Farmersville to be with her people or whatever, and so we were forced to have to find the best pizza in Dayton. as sort of a contest. And it was kind of tricky with the basket and all the other kind of things, eat the pizza with them anyway. Elsa's was my favorite. And it could have been the 2 pounds of chips and salsa that you get. But it was really good. So the polyvagal safety, so we talked about the polyvagal thing here before, so the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system was just sort of mobilized, ready to go, and it wanted to look at people to clarify where should we go. Should we go hug, or should we run, or should we pass out, or should we realize we're about to die and a truck's going to hit us, and we should do a dorsal vagal shutdown and write, Jesus, take the wheel. I think in the Palestine thing, what do they do over there when you got that stuff in the air? And I remember I was in Vietnam one day, and there was this like jet flying over about 6:30 in the morning, and this fumes were coming out the back end. Oh, that's why we don't have these bugs here. Just tons of stuff. So there was all kinds of happy factories in Texas were making all kinds of stuff. And the Agent Orange wasn't the worst agent, actually. There was a purple, blue, and something else. And there was a website where they had all those things kind of summarized. So the virus suppresses autoimmune suppressor genes. It suppresses tumor suppressor genes. We're already seeing like a wave of cancer, a little extra rectal cancer, and that's from my cancer center people. And the autoimmune, nobody's going to see that because it's too difficult. It's like 9 to 1 women, maybe 8 to 1 women, and women get discarded in the healthcare system if they have too many symptoms. So they get sent to somewhere else. Like I said, you go to the Cleveland Clinic, so they don't pay attention to anybody. It looks like equal opportunity. The variants, they do pay attention to people, but they don't pay attention to humans. They pay attention to parts. It's a parts place, a good parts place. The variants, the vaccines, all of them suppress the autoimmune suppressor genes. Plus, if you look at the mRNA shots, you got the lipid nanoparticle. I had like 26.2 billion of those little babies. I went exactly, instead of my left arm. And I sort of thought maybe they did because my arm hurt and then I couldn't get up the neck on my banjo. So I figured that must have stayed right there, but they didn't. And polyethylene glycol, all kinds of people are allergic to polyethylene glycol, which you might know as Miralax, or some people know as antifreeze. That's what they took the 32.1 billion little strands of RNA and wrapped them in a lipid nanoparticle, a little fat bag, and painted that with polyethylene glycol to make it look attractive to the blood-brain barrier, which it crosses, and the gut barrier, which it crosses. So Debbie wrote a whole big thing about that. Mast cells, histamine, heart rhythm. And there's a little of everything in this one. She kind of floated a little bit. She apologized. Because there was, and this has the heart stuff in there, and the heart rhythms, and if you pick the wrong parents, but the overlap with the histamine and the spike protein. So the spike protein is the name of the game, spikeopathy. So the spikeopathy is what the FLCCC named the pathological thing that is everywhere. Spikes are in your brain, in your gut, in whatever. So the brain part, most psychiatric diagnoses have an autoimmune element, emerging link between autoimmune disorders and neuropsychiatric disease, autoimmune disorders of the nervous system, pathophysiology, clinical features of therapy, metallothionein, and brain disorders. Metallothionein is a protein that is ordered by zinc. So if you have too much metal, your zinc says, well, make some metallothionein and fish that out. And so metallothionein, though, in the brain, if it functions wrong, you can get all this metal stuck in your brain. I'm not sure where the zinc is at the time. The COVID-19 triggers for autoimmune toll-like receptor 7 deficiency is a highly penetrant genetic etiology of critical COVID-19 pneumonia. 1.8% of male patients below the age of 60 have that, and that caused a lot of them to get admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. It's on the X chromosome, so women are half better on this one, because they have 2 X chromosomes, so they can kind of downplay it. But the That's one of those things, X chromosome things, the guys might get more. We talked about the Walls protocol and so the long COVID and a lot of long haul COVID is old haul. So it might be from toxins or like the people in Palestine. Their stuff is going to be like dioxin or vinyl chloride or there's another butyrate, some kind of butyrate thing. So infections, metabolic problems, hormonal, these things might cause old hauling, and it looks like long haul, like Lyme, mast cell, Bartonella, Babesia, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, which is a cousin to mononucleosis. Mold is coming on strong, low testosterone, or hormonal imbalances. So these things could look like long haul, but also be triggering autoimmune things. So these protocols you got in your hand there, the I Recover post-vaccine treatment, has some things there that are sort of interestingly, sort of some of the stuff they mentioned for some of these. Let's see, we get to page 1, promote autophagy. So autophagy, there was an autophagy slide. So anyway, that's your cells, if they get debris in them, they're supposed to clean it up by a process called autophagy. And that's part of God's grand design, that each cell has its own garbage system. So it'll clean it up with the virus and some other things in there. It doesn't clean as well. Things that make autophagy worse is COVID-19 or the spike protein. Things that make it better to get the spikes out of there is intermittent fasting, apples, mangoes, grapefruit, mushrooms. Those things are kind of spike flushers. And autophagy is connected to apoptosis, which is how cells die without rotting. So we get 1 billion new cells a day, we lose 1 billion cells a day. One of the new cells we get every day is a cancer cell, and we're doing good with it, probably. Yeah, go ahead.
The question on that, so there's all these ways that you're mentioning about getting rid of the spike protein, but if somebody took a shot and trained their cells to create the spike protein on a continual basis, how do you ever really get rid of those cells that are creating the spike protein?
That's a good question. We may have an infinite manufacturing system. So what let's see, the virus, you just got some blood from hepatitis people to try to see, there's the question of good blood. So can you get a good transfusion? So they found that 10% of the blood, they took blood from hepatitis people to do something, and they said, well, let's test it for these things. People that had the shots and haven't had the shots, how much they got that looks like it would be bad blood that would have the virus or the spikes or whatever. So 10% was contaminated, and they thought 90% wasn't, but did they do the right test? Because you always, there's got to be a yes but person on every one of those committees. Say yes, but did you consider this? Did you look at this site here? Because it's too important not to have the yes but, not to have somebody saying, well, wait a minute, that's part of the brain of every doctor. Is supposed to be a yes but brain component. To say, well, it looks good, you can really cheer for people, but all my patients are going to die. And I don't talk about that too often, like you're going to die. But people are comfortable talking about death. They're not, old people aren't that worried about dying, they just don't want to mess it up. So they just got, say, okay, the hospital's going to, anyway, so we get this therapies here. Intermittent fasting. Ivermectin is a spike flusher, it's an immune enhancer. It kills parasites also. We treated about 750 people with ivermectin, and only 4 had diarrhea that they told us about, which I thought I thought we'd get some parasites, some gut parasites. Maybe we did. Moderating physical activity, low dose naltrexone, nattokinase, which is a blood thinner, natural blood thinner, aspirin, which is blood thinner, melatonin, which is it's a brain lung cleaner. It's a antidepressant. It's a sleeping pill. It lowers the cholesterol, decreases the potential for breast and colon cancer in some people. Magnesium is good for over 300 processes in the body, especially irritable brain, teeth grinding, restless legs, palpitations. It's a calcium channel blocker, so as is diltiazem and a couple of drugs that we prescribe. So it can go right after like blood pressure and certain other things at a lesser level. Methylene blue is kind of new here, and it cures the planet, but I don't believe that because I just saw the video once and didn't read the articles yet. Sunlight, resveratrol. So resveratrol is coming on strong with some neurologists who are trying to figure out what to do with the post-vaccine neurological injuries and neuropathies. So it looks like it's 2-to-1 on the post-vaccine injured versus the long COVID as far as the neurodegenerative disorders. But the stats aren't in because people are hiding a lot of them.
Are these stats on these things highly correlated to batches, like the deaths were correlated to batches?
No.
No.
There are, so those would be Substacks. There's our batch person. I think Naomi Wolf published something about that somebody else did. So I kind of follow about 10 people. And some guy called the Eagle, he does all the VAERS stuff every day, say what they just erased and what was just added, and just kind of shocking stuff. So no, so exact statistics are hard to come by in subgroups. That's what it looked like in studies, like the low-dose naltrexone, interestingly blocks a whole bunch of these autoimmune things and inflammatory things, toll-like receptors and interleukins. So it's catching a good reputation with a bunch of small studies out of the UK and Ireland and Scotland for all kinds of disorders, including everything you all mentioned, has been treated with low-dose naltrexone for better or worse or richer or poorer or success or lack thereof. So it's kind of coming on as an interesting drug because it hits mu receptors, which are opiate receptors. Turns out that there's opiate receptors on the cell surface and there's immune receptors, and they kind of communicate with each other through the low-dose naltrexone. So it optimizes some immune functions, decreases inflammation, kills some pain, but also it causes the brain to rethink, why should it let some outside source kill the pain? So you get a low dose of it, you flick the mu receptors, and the brain says, wait a minute, we can do that ourselves. 4 hours later, you get a big dose of endocannabinoids, which kills some pain and up your immune system and inflammation and all kinds of stuff. It's a very, very interesting drug. Small study, and it's generic, and it's compounded. You can't get it at regular pharmacies. So it has a pathway of where the ivermectin sort of came from. And full disclosure, somebody bought me a free dinner to hear more about that 4 months ago. The dessert was incredible. We're at the Country Club, and I tried to cover the bias, but everybody is biased, and it's okay. I love hearing about this because the dessert, I have to prescribe it to 20 people because it was worth it. No, I didn't have that thought actually. But vitamin D, N-acetylcysteine, so NAC, resveratrol, and NAC, and curcumin. There's about 3 other things are the biggies, and intermittent fasting sort of covers a lot of stuff. They're looking at all the different syndromes, and all the autoimmune things, and all the diseases, and all the cancers, and all the other stuff covered from SARS-CoV-2, the variants of the vaccines, and the virus. And there's too many little things to play with one at a time. So the top 10 include that NAC and resveratrol. Resveratrol, neurological cleaner, NAC, N-acetylcysteine, brain, lung, liver, and obsessive thoughts and behaviors. So everybody, we've all had obsessive thoughts and behaviors during the pandemic. Omega-3 is a brain cleaner, and it pushes back against autoimmune stuff. Spermidine is a chemical that's in wheat germ, so I'm not a big wheat fan, but it also comes out of the grapefruit and mangoes, apples, and mushrooms a bit. And people sell it online. There's some high-quality spermidine somewhere that's another wonder chemical. Non-invasive brain stimulation. So hyperbaric chambers. So hyperbaric chambers are now being used for long COVID. So we look at so we kind of go from the pandemic, the stressors can trigger autoimmune. Picking the right parents can give us some protection. Picking the wrong parents may be a little tougher. Eating the right food can help it a little bit. And then suddenly it's 2 years later in the pandemic. You get the extra stressors and whatnot, and we find our didgeridoos and our vagus nerve toning, and we're racing for the home stretch with intermittent fasting, or NAC, resveratrol, curcumin, and anything else you can think of. Oh well. So any questions on any of that?
Yeah, question, some people say ozone works, like ozone infused into your blood and all that kind of stuff works against long COVID, COVID-19, and, some of these kinds of issues. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know anything about ozone. I did just watch 25 hours of videos about long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome, which didn't have any ozone people, but they had, there was the people with their issue, their doctors from all over the country who are integrated practitioners, and I'm about to watch a series on mold. I think there will be ozone in the mold probably, and there'll be ozone in a couple other places. So just that those people weren't there, and I never read much about ozone.
I think the guys over in Greenville do some of that stuff, right?
I've had it.
There you go. So you get to hear about that next month?
Yes.
Yes.
So some of these things that you described, like the melatonin and intermittent fasting and magnesium and so on, apples, grapefruit, are you saying that those help to mitigate the spikes
Yeah.
in
So
your
the
system?
spike
So if you had
flushers.
COVID, or if you had the vaccine, that will help to, that possibly may help.
It may help you. Yeah.
Okay.
It's biologically plausible. So I looked at I watched a bunch of videos on the functional medicine people recently. And berberine, they had berberine, and it's like melatonin, it's like metformin. So berberine may come into the top 10 in the next couple months. Because you're trying to figure out how few bottles can you buy, and how much intermittent fasting can you do. You want to flush spikes, and you want your cells to have this perfect autophagy and to decelerate and to die perfectly when they're supposed to. The spikes, one of the bad things on the COVID was the spikes would be captured by the spike with this S1 thing. The monocyte would capture that to kill it, to take it to the garbage dump, and it would bequeath the monocyte with eternal life. It was programmed to block the autophagy in the cell until it didn't have that autophagy life cycle anymore. It was going to go forever. And so that atypical monocyte, according to Bruce Patterson's studies, will float all over the body and get deposited in all these places. And who knows how many spikes we actually might have, or none. Do we already flush it out with the right mangoes or whatever? We sort of never quite know.
And to follow up my question, melatonin, can you take melatonin for too long a period of time and your body will no longer create it itself? I mean, I thought you had to not take it every day for,
Good question. So there's different people that like pulsing. I think Andy Weil likes pulsing because he has to write about everything. He has to start and stop so many things. Dr. Lynch, though, likes pulsing. In his book, The Dirty Gene, he does a decent job of explaining it. He doesn't say how you decide when you're going to pulse, but you sort of, you get the benefit of a certain thing. You say, okay, I got the benefit. Let me let nature take its course now. And then if it starts to derail again, then you go back. With spikes, we have no idea if we got the spikes or not the spikes. A lot of people have brain fog. People who are left with the brain fog, there's just different things that may help with brain fog. And on the medical side, it's that low-dose naltrexone. But everything else, I think berberine and curcumin were on the functional medicine people's list. And the resveratrol is probably at the top of the list for people straddling the fence of medical and health food.
Also the Nigella sativa, the black seed.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry I didn't mention that, because I saw Nigella sativa. So we put
Nigella sativa.
black cumin.
black seed?
So black cumin is also known as black seed, and in these references it's Nigella sativa, because they like that sativa word, because it's cannabis sativa, and other sativa words, but it's the anti-parasite type of chemical, and the Muslim nations use a lot for vitamins. They take a pinch of black seed. You can buy a bag of black seed on Amazon. Pinch of black seed twice a day.
It's poppy seeds.
What's that?
It looks like poppy seeds.
Yeah.
It's tiny, it'll get stuck in your teeth.
Yeah.
In Africa, a lot of people were taking Artemisia annua.
Yeah. Artemisia is good, wormwood, for everything. But I don't know the other one.
Okay.
And there was a couple others like that, and it's hard to figure out. Like on C19early.com, there's a website with 2,500 studies of things that treat the coronavirus, including vitamin D, vitamin C, diet and some other things. But ivermectin and Paxlovid, and they rate all of them compared to each other as far as prevention, death, hospital. And the studies come in and the numbers are just aggregated in. They don't judge if they're lying or what. They just say, here's what looks like is the most effective, least effective. Ivermectin's been up and down 5 times. Paxlovid was at the top when they only had 2 studies, and it's down about 50% or so. Remdesivir never got above 20% effectiveness potential, and they do a forest plot of the study, so they have like a little green dot over here. If it's like a positive thing, and a little red dot if it's negative. Remdesivir has a bunch of red dots, killed a bunch of people. Killed over, I think it was 600 people in the first 2 months that they had it on the market. The shot killed over 1,600 the first month they had it on the market. But then their argument is there were that many people dying from the COVID, so why not kill a few with the shot? And it's okay, and that's just what leaders do, and so forth and so on. That's where voters and individuals come in to kind of get feedback about that stuff.
Just a question about the mRNA vaccines. I don't know a lot about the biology, but my understanding is these things co-opt cells and then train the cells to create the spike proteins.
Yes.
And if they're co-opting a cell, and
It's part of the cell.
then you're actually taking away you're not only creating a toxin with that cell, but you're taking away the functioning capability of that cell by redirecting the cell manufacturing to produce something other than what it was doing before.
You're right.
So I wonder how much is lost in terms of an opportunity cost, and are there certain types of cells that are targeted by the mRNA or the lipid nanoparticles to get to a particular type of cell, to get those particular types of cells to create the spike protein?
Let's see, the lipid nanoparticle allegedly was to help things work better, but it's been used to get chemotherapy, for example, into the brain. So the lipid nanoparticle crosses the blood-brain barrier and goes into every organ in the body. So you did sort of toxicity studies in Japan, Pfizer did, that the Canadian doctors had to sue Pfizer in Japan with a FOIA to get to release the information. And it showed that in 48 hours it went through every organ in the body and ended up still concentrating. The concentration was going up in ovaries when they stopped the study. And they didn't know what that might do, except we all know that the birth rate's down about 12% in every country on the planet currently.
Was it also stuck in the hepatic system? And is there a process known as reverse transcription that has had any more additional studies on it? Because originally when this came out, biodistribution was not discussed, right? All parties in question did not challenge the orthodoxy that would remain in your lymph node at the point of injection. And then biodistribution later revealed, I think it was a German study, about 5 months after was the latest that they tracked it, was that it was still accumulating in the reproductive systems and the hepatic system. And I think it was Sweden that had an in vivo, not in vitro, but an in vivo study. So is there any more that you're aware of on that part? Because that would imply that there is a succession of passing that genetically in subsequent generations.
I think there's about 3. So in these 25 hours that I watched like last week, it's all a blur now, but it's drtalks.com. They have like over 1,200 videos out of their different summits, and for only $50 extra, whatever it was, I've accessed all those, so I'm going to look at all the mold and some other. I think I saw 3 studies, and I wasn't searching for them. They pop up on the high hit people, and you say, okay, what is this saying? So it was reverse transcriptase. McCullough picked that up and said it looked like it was accurate. He's a decent reader of studies. And Malone did also, let's see, for everything, Dr. Bean did a real good job on those videos saying, okay, get the shot here, and it goes here, 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 and then it goes here, 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 and then it goes to here, then the exosomes grab it, and they go here to the bone marrow. And the shot goes to the bone marrow, and it's there with your chronic Epstein-Barr and some other kind of stuff in the bone marrow with the possibility of being called up anytime certain things happen or doing certain pathological behaviors forever. So that's the shot forever, bone marrow. And the guy who was interviewing him was a real talker, and was speechless because he knew what he just heard. It was bad. So what's the percentage? We don't know what percent. We don't know how much intermittent fasting or how many mangoes we have to eat. Does it block anything? Or do we pick the wrong parents and we're going down the chute anyway? But we do know that we all live, we all die sooner or later, and God wins.
That's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Jonas, tonight.